If Tim Burton's Beetlejuice and Pixar's Monsters, Inc. had a baby, and then you took that baby and you dipped its soft baby head into a bathtub full of 80s music, you'd probably wind up with a movie that looks a lot like 1989's Little Monsters.
Keep an eye out for monsters!
I first saw Little Monsters when I was about 7 or 8 years old, but the movie's eerie set pieces and bizarre cast of characters really stuck with me. And for a low-budget kids movie in the 1980s, it has some pretty impressive practical effects. Like, how did they even get Fred Savage's eyebrows to do that? 30 years ago, this movie was enjoyable and strange. Let's see if it still holds up today. The movie starts off with Brian telling us how bummed out he is that he and his family recently moved to a new town. Brian's not your average 11-year-old though. He's quirky. He builds a bunch of weird gadgets. He sneaks down to the kitchen after bedtime and makes peanut butter and onion sandwiches. He wears nightgowns to bed like an orphan from a Charles Dickens novel. Just to make sure I wasn't the idiot, I tried out the peanut butter and onion sandwich as well as the nightgown. I give 2 thumbs down to the sandwich, but 2 thumbs up to the nightgown. My nethers have never felt so free. Not only is Brian unhappy with moving to a new town, but his parents are also constantly fighting, their marriage seemingly hanging by a thread. On top of that, Brian's parents keep blaming him for stuff he says he didn't do.
My bike! You ain't over it!
Whose fault is this, Brian?
No way! I parked it right over there, right there!
Somebody put it there, Brian.
Meanwhile, Brian's little brother Eric, played by Fred Savage's real-life little brother, complains he saw a monster in his room.
It ran in from the hall, grabbed my ankle, and slid under my bed.
And while Brian is blaming Eric for the stuff his parents are blaming him for, Eric insists it's the monster from under his bed who is causing all the trouble.
I didn't touch your bike. I can hardly reach the pedal.
All right, that's it. You lie to me, we'll start.
My lunch! You If you say there's no monster, then switch rooms with me.
Yeah, you sleep in Eric's room, and he sleeps in your room.
I double dare you to switch rooms.
So Brian accepts the dare and switches rooms for the night. And of course, weird stuff happens. So being creeped out, Brian sleeps downstairs, but offers to go double or nothing. And this time, he's going in prepared. He uses his busted up bike and some rope to create an elaborate monster catching trap in his bedroom. And then to bait the monster, Brian sets down a line of Doritos, which then leads to one of the hottest ASMR sessions you'll ever hear.
Very soon, some of you will notice a change in Doritos. Doritos, now with more nacho cheese flavor.
The director must have realized the hypnotic power behind these crunches too, because he put them in the end credits. The trap works and Brian finally meets Maurice, the monster who's been causing all the trouble.
Boo.
Now scream.
Scream! Good idea! You know what? You scream, your dad's gonna come in here with a 12-gauge shotgun, blow your head off. Actually, I'll scream.
Anyway, Brian soon discovers that being exposed to bright light, especially sunlight, is bad for monsters. Once Maurice is exposed, he sprouts horns.
Horns! Great!
Then when hit with direct sunlight, Maurice starts melting. Or shrinking. I don't know what happens, but as Maurice slowly dies on Brian's bedroom floor, he begs Brian to spare his life and slide him back under the bed.
Have to get under the bed before the sun totally rises.
No way. You wrecked my bike. You've been pulling stuff, trying to get me in trouble.
Yep, Maurice left Brian's bike out in the driveway, so for that, Maurice must die. Who's the real monster here?
You wrecked my bike. You wrecked my bike. You wrecked my bike.
My mother wishes me to let Loretta join the Night's Watch.
But you wrecked my bike.
Brian suddenly realizes the movie would end if Maurice died right then and there, and so he spares Maurice by slipping his wadded up clothes back under the bed.
Hey, bud, the name's Maurice, and I'll catch you later.
The next night, Maurice comes back to visit Brian and properly introduces himself, and tells Brian all the joys and wonders of what it's like being a monster.
Think of it, Brian. No teachers, no rules, no homework. It's about leaving your clothes wherever it is you want to leave them. It's about never having to clean up after you eat.
Maurice even shows Brian how the whole under-the-bed entrance-exit thing works, and invites him down into the world of monsters.
Whoa there, Thunder. Candles, matches, even something festive like this. This would be nice, but absolutely no bright light.
For what it is, the monster world under the bed is actually a pretty interesting set piece. It's simple, but I find it pretty eerie and effective. For being a set made up of 99% wood pallets, Monster World looks pretty interesting. However, I'm not sure why candles would be a good idea. Maurice gives Brian the grand tour and Brian gets a dose of what the monster life is like. And it's exactly what Maurice described, total freedom. Freedom to tilt pinball machines.
Down here, there's no such thing as tilting.
Freedom to eat za.
Za! I love za!
Freedom to hunt humans for sport.
Amazing.
Okay, maybe not that, but it does make me wonder where the line gets drawn in Monster World. This is a place with 0 rules, right? Is there a bar in Monster World? Is there a dogfighting ring? Is there a tobacco store? And don't tell me it's a kids themed zone that wouldn't consider alcohol or drugs because this monster smokes. Maybe this is why Maurice is so hyper.
Wow! Baseball cards! I love baseball cards! Got 'em, need 'em, got 'em, need 'em, got 'em, need 'em, got 'em, need 'em! Whoa!
Maurice also takes Brian to other kids' houses and shows them what it's like to cause mischief, and you're treated to a long montage of unadulterated shenanigans. One of the reasons this movie works is that it really shows what having fun as a kid might look like if adults weren't around. It digs into the kid fantasy of a seemingly consequence-free life without parents ruining all your fun. The film's very obvious about this when it paints virtually every single one of its authority figures as total sticks in the mud.
You did, mister.
Get back in your seats or I'll destroy every one of you!
Well, Mr. Stevenson, thank you for joining us.
Anyway, Brian starts to get seduced by the monster lifestyle, but learns that spending too much time in Monster World causes adverse effects, like having to wear cool Ray-Bans all the time, shrinking, and parts of his body disappearing when exposed to light. It's around this time that the scenes start to feel a little sloppy. Some moments start to feel like they were thrown in just to add extra conflict. There's a part where Maurice shreds Brian's girlfriend's homework, which then leads to Brian and Maurice having a falling out.
You chewed it up. You destroyed it. You know she got a 0 because of you?
I was hungry, okay?
Then the two share a dramatic makeup scene after Brian's parents announce they're separating, only in the next minute to become ex-best friends again after Maurice takes Brian to an infant's room to scare him.
Come on, stop it!
Brian, relax, okay?
Maurice, this is cruel.
The baby scaring scene could have been lost altogether and instead replaced with something with more substance. Like, how about giving Maurice some backstory? We hardly know anything about him. Brian eventually realizes he's turning into a monster like Maurice, so I'm assuming that most, if not all, of these monsters were human kids at one point. If that's true, then what was Maurice's life like as a kid before he was a monster? It's implied he's super old,
I've been in this business now, well over 200 years.
but also still a kid.
How old are you?
11.
So was he turned into a monster 200 years ago when he was 11 and stayed 11 forever? That sounds interesting. By the end, Maurice really doesn't amount to anything except an oddball sidekick. Kind of like the genie from Aladdin, but not as funny and less sympathetic because Maurice actually enjoys being a monster. Maurice's character has a built-in obnoxiousness that Howie Mandel pulled off probably better than most actors could. Daniel Stern as Brian's father is pretty awesome as usual. The amazing Rick Dukeman does an especially good job at playing Snick, the violent, short-tempered, roid-raging monster who works for the ever-terrifying overseer of Monster World, Boy, played by Frank Whaley. My God, did he dial up the creepy for this role.
You'll stay and be my pal.
Both of these villains combined would be enough reason to question showing this movie to a 5-year-old. They're fucking scary, man.
I'm gonna take my big thumb and jam it in your eye! Now I'm gonna take my finger and put it in the corner of your mouth and I'm gonna rip the corner of your mouth out!
Jesus Christ.
And
Ugh, check please. In fact, there's a lot of reasons why I might not show this to a 5 to 7-year-old, even though Netflix says that's the preferred audience for this movie.
You wanna watch Letterman? You wanna watch the Playboy channel?
Holy shit.
Welcome to Channel 98 Cable Access, all about chicks.
What Little Monsters does get right though is what it feels like to be a kid, and it likely pulls it off not in spite of, but because of its adult themes and mild touch of raunchiness. It's similar to movies like Camp Nowhere and Home Alone and Blank Check, showing what it's like to live your best kid life, away from those bastard grown-ups. It also shows some of the unsavory aspects of childhood.
It's just like it's a trial separation.
Oh God, sorry. That's what you do before you get a divorce.
Brian, we're not getting a divorce.
Little Monsters was directed by Richard Greenberg. He directed only a couple other projects, one being an episode of Tales from the Crypt. He did work on several other projects in the visual effects department, which is one of the things that Little Monsters does a more than decent job at, especially given its budget. I give Little Monsters a watchability rating of 8. If you haven't seen this one, I suggest you do, and if you saw it when you were a kid, it's worth revisiting. It's a weird one, but it's entertaining, and it captures that late 80s feel about as well as that other 1989 movie starring Fred Savage.
I love the Power Glove. It's so bad.